I wanted to talk about humans today. So one thing I always liked about humans is that sounds weird, right? But one thing I always found very interesting about humans, myself, other people, people I know, people I guess know in theory, characters and all that, is how complex and therefore also contradictory we are. And I think it's interesting. It's an interesting thing, maybe not specific to humans, but I've always have a particular affinity, fondness for humans and human-shaped creatures, characters, like things that's adjacent to human-looking. I like dolls. I like a lot of fictional characters. And I think the thing that ties it together is really how each of these human, I'm just gonna say human for the rest of this video, but each of this human being is filled with so many different characteristics, so many different likes, dislikes, complexities, traits. Could be physical, could be personal, could be the way they react in certain situations, could be anything, like any small little thing about a human being. Just like, I think what's really interesting is that when you add them all together, you can't quite ever see that person in full at any one point in time. And I think that is inherent in how complex humans are, and also the fact that we can only observe people kind of through interactions, which is through a unit of time. So you kind of see people in instances, slices of time. And as such, it's kind of like humans are much more complex than just four-dimensional because time, but three-dimensional physically. We are so much more complex than just, our physical three-dimensional self, or how we exist throughout time, so as four-dimensional beings. And I'm not gonna touch on like anything, 5D or spiritual, anything like that. Although that could potentially be interesting, but I don't really know enough to talk about that. But what I really mean is that let's talk about this idea of a Zen garden. So I can't remember the name of this Zen garden, and I really should, because it's an example that I like to bring up from time to time, but I don't remember what it's called. I've been there physically. Yeah, anyway, I don't remember what it's called. But it's something like it has 12 or 13 specific stones that you're meant to spot in this Zen garden. So this Zen garden has a bunch of like rocks, some plants, moss, like not particularly leafy foliage, but just you can sort of see everything, if not for the fact that they are laid out such that when you walk along the kind of like wooden corridor that it is in front of, you can only ever see it such that if, let's say, there's 12 rocks, I can't remember whether it's 12 or 13, but let's say it's 12, right? Let's say it's 13, right? Let's say there's a total of 13 rocks that you're meant to spot. At any one point as you walk along, so imagine this kind of like rectangle, and then you're kind of like along one perimeter of it. You're not meant to go into the garden. As you walk along the outer edges of it, at any particular point along this edge, you can only ever see 12, meaning one less than the total number of rocks that you're meant to see. And the reason why it's a Zen garden is because if you are able to quiet your mind and kind of mentally construct an image of what you see as you move across this perimeter, you would realize that there is one rock that you are not able to see in whichever position you are in. And of course that one rock changes, right, because of the vantage point. But the point is that although visually at any one location you can only see 12 rocks, if you put together all the images that you see across those locations in your mind's eye, or however you like to visualize. I know not everybody can visualize, but assuming you can, in your mind's eye you'll be able to sort of reconstruct or perceive that they are actually in fact 13 specific rocks that you're meant to be able to see. And sorry, that was a particularly long-winded explanation, but I think the idea is that similar to how we could only have a few particular vantage points to see these rocks, we only ever interact with another human being through a very narrow pinpoint of interaction, and that could be, we can see it as time-based, we can also see it as interaction-based, but whatever the case is, you can also even just see it as the fact that you are the one that has to interact with the other person to even be able to see into them, right? So there are a lot of particular peepholes that kind of restrict your point of view into seeing another person and another human, and this could be a real person, a fictional character. I'm not particular about differentiating them, but I think of course a real person has their own will and autonomy, and therefore it's going to be infinitely much more complex than a fictional character. But I do think there are some benefits to knowing a fictional character, if only because there will always be things beyond what the creator has intended, even if it's just let's say it's a book series or book written by one single author, even if it's just one single author, where you might think they should have the reins on everything that character is meant to be, right? They should have the final say. But as somebody who has written stories, created own characters, original characters, it's not quite that simple. I think a lot of times characters also run away from you, and they kind of develop their own tensions, their own will, their own things that they would like to do. They're not completely autonomous the way real humans are, but I think if as a writer or as a person who creates characters, you truly see what is happening on the page or see what has been written or created, and you let the character do its own thing, you will realize that it's not you as the creator, you're never fully in control of it. And that's what I mean by, I kind of find humans having so much more complexity than you would see at first glance, which is kind of the point, right? You can't really see it at first glance. So that's complexity. But I also think because of this complexity, humans are inherently contradictory. And the contradiction is, I guess, just by the fact that you hold so much multitudes, you, me, everybody else on this planet, yes, even the person that you don't like, just by the fact that we each hold so much multitude is gonna give rise to the fact that we are gonna contradict ourselves sometimes. And it could be as simple as I'm gonna contradict myself immediately in the next second within this video, or if you know me for longer, over the years, I might contradict myself. And I think things like over the years, it might be easier because I don't think contradicting yourself is inherently bad. Contrary to perhaps popular belief at the moment, I think contradicting yourself, one way it could, generally be positive is that, you're willing to admit not say necessarily admit that you're wrong, but like you're willing to accept a new perspective that perhaps you might not have thought of before, and that could be one way you contradict yourself. You might have held a certain point of view, and then you took in new perspectives, and then you realize, hey, I would like to change that point of view now. But I think even without that necessarily, I guess, more positive spin on it, thinking of it as like, hey, I've grown. Even just like, you say something and then you literally just contradict yourself afterwards. Like, sure, does it make you a nice person to interact with in that moment? Maybe not. Okay, and I think we all have times where we are not nice. It's just a fact of life. There are times where we're not nice, not pleasant to be around. But we're talking about interests here, not about, objectively whether I like you as a person, as a friend, as a whatever. I think it's possible to find something interesting even if I don't like it. So I'm not gonna put like in this equation. It's not the point of what I want to talk about today. I think it's just the idea of the fact that we are contradictory is not contradictory in itself, if that makes sense. The fact that we are contradictory just kind of shows how infinitely complex we are, to the point where we can hold the vast expanse of everything that could be. Like, I could be really angry, or I could be really calm, and it could happen within a really short, like 10 minutes. And like, that is not inherently contradictory in itself. But I mean, it is contradictory, like the fact that we oscillate between these emotions, but like that you can be both is not inherently impossible, if that makes sense. And I think that makes it interesting because of the possibilities of, it's like permutation and combination, right? If there's so many complexities, there's so many possible contradictions, there's so many possible ways for things to interact. And yet, because we are human beings, we have a physical appearance, a physical form, and we also, are sort of limited by what we can do with our time, how we can interact with people. So we're kind of limited by these 4 dimensions. 3 spatial dimension and 1 time dimension. We can't actually show the infinite dimensions that we are. And I guess the fact that, the lens that we're viewing it through is 4D when we could be so many infinite dimensions, right? It sort of means that each of us as humans, even as we are complex and contradictory, do tend to end up displaying certain characteristics more often than not, just by observation from the outside. Like, sure, maybe internally we are, infinitely complex and having this many traits and all that stuff, but to a person observing from the outside, you can only ever see a limited perspective of that. And that's kind of, the only way I can observe humans other than myself. And in fact, it's also sort of the way that I can only observe myself. Like, I can't inherently know everything about myself. I also have to observe myself to know myself. So I guess I am also restricted by the limited perspective that an observer has. But I think like all this really, all this meaning the infinitely complex human, the leading to the fact that we all have contradictions, but also the very limited ability and way that we can observe these infinite traits is what makes humans so interesting, for me at least. And there was one more point that I was going to make, but I completely forgot. And because I'm recording with my DSLR, which I cannot see the screen of, I'm going to do a time check now. We have something like 4 minutes, and I don't think I can remember what I wanted to say in that time. So what I will say is, I think it's always fun to imagine. I remember what I wanted to say. Right. So I think because of the fact that we only can observe people, humans, through a limited lens, whatever we can observe is limited by the amount of time we spend looking in, whether it's into ourselves, into other people, into fictional characters. We are limited by that, we only have a certain amount of time, certain amount of energy, certain amount of effort, care, and the fact that we can, or that we love any person or human, including ourselves, and I must always stress that, is that we have put in that time, that effort and care and love and, all this tender, positive emotions, affectionate emotions into seeing, observing, knowing the other person to such incredible depths, and honestly with, I guess, also, just because we are so complex. The fact that you can know a person to this level is sort of a symbol of how much affection you have for someone. And I think, like, as always, before you even, I always like to think of it as before you start projecting all this onto other people, sometimes it's good to look at yourself and, like, be aware that, I am also an infinitely complex and contradictory human, and I can spend that time and affection and love and care into looking into myself. And I think this video is gonna end here because of the restriction on time I have today. I don't usually have this restriction when I record on my phone, so it's a bit of a rush ending, but just something to, I guess, let you think about. We might return to this topic another time, and that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Bye.